Hello everybody and welcome to today's Leagues 5 video. With the full announcement of Combat Masteries, I have just been going back and forth on so many different builds and so many different options. And while I will be showing you some of the highest damage builds in all of Leagues right now, I also really want to highlight unique and interesting builds because honestly, your damage is just going to be so astronomical in Leagues anyways, and I think that going for regions that you find fun and going for interesting combinations that offer some novel experience is much better for this Leagues. Especially now that all raids drop every mega rare, this really opens up just a world of possibilities, and as long as you have one of these raid regions, you usually are able to put out pretty comparable DPS to the very best builds. And it's usually not worth completely devoting your combination around just a few DPS percentage points. With that being said, I have 7 builds prepared for you today, and I hope you really consider going for one of these, or maybe you already have your region selected and this is enough to push you off of that and experiment with something completely brand new. First up, one of my favorite builds to come out of Leagues 5 is VMT Melee, or as I like to call it, Varla Mora Tiranwin. And I'm calling this build the Reaper. Now, of course, you'll get that scythe, that's part of it, but the other big part is all of the lifesteal effects, so you'll be able to combo with this build. Melee naturally gets 2% lifesteal, but you can also combine this with the Amulet of Blood Fury for an additional 6%, which will bring you to 8% lifesteal. The Tier 2 passive will increase healing from all sources by 20%, bringing this up to 9.6% lifesteal. And finally, you'll be able to double that with the Sunlit Bracers from Echo Soul, bringing you up to a whopping 19.2% lifesteal. I have always loved lifesteal builds, and I think that this is by far the most broken one we've seen yet. This is going to give you so much survivability, and it's going to be directly tied to how much damage you're able to output. And that's where all the other great melee options come in as well. You'll have a ton of great early game items with barrows. Eventually, this can become Inquisitor and the Scythe. And you can actually swap this out later for the Crystal Armor set from Tiranwin with that Crystal Blessing to still get that Crystal Armor bonus with your Scythe. In addition, Vardorvis in Varlamore will give you the Ultor Ring, giving you some more melee strength, and you'll still have the option of switching to the Amulet of Rancor if you want to give up some of that lifesteal and just pump out even more damage. I think this is a very competitive build. You're not even going to have to go Fremenic to get the jewelry over there because you already have great options in your slots. And I just feel like melee progression is so fun because there's so many different weapons to try out. So I really feel like the progression here is just going to be a complete blast. Now, for your combat masteries, you're definitely going to want to rush 6 points into melee, and then I would put an additional 4 into magic, so you have a 6-0-4 split. Those 4 points in magic will shore up some of your weaknesses, namely against Grotesque Guardians, as you won't be able to do them with just melee. And grabbing Grimoire will give you a ton of value as you don't have access to any of the spellbooks or any of the prayers. So you could even be a freezer in Theater of Blood until you get like the Sunlit Spear from Echo Soul, and then just use that to clear the Nilo's room anyway. I think in general, the Varlamore Mauritania core is very key to a lot of melee builds right now, and you're going to see a lot of people gravitating towards this theme. And you could honestly swap out some of these regions, maybe drop Tiranwin and go for the Wildy or go for Fremenic instead. And you'll probably realize that there's just so many different ways that you can iterate on these builds and create new variations, swap a region here, add this instead. And I'll probably be here all day if I actually go into it. So I'm really going to try to just focus on the core themes and leave that experimentation up to you. Now, I mentioned that melee progression is so fun because you have access to so many different weapons, and that includes a ton of spec weapons as well. So for a really unique combination, try out DAW Melee. That's Desert, Asgarnia, and the Wilderness. The idea here is to get a lot of your gear from Asgarnia, the more traditional melee region, while the Wilderness will complement that with new Kopesh and the Thousand Dragon Ward, and the Desert will be your raid region, giving you access to not only the Scythe, but also the Light Bearer, which will come in handy with putting out even more specs. Of course, with Asgarnia, very fitting of the name, you will have the Dog Sword, and most of the bosses in these regions aren't even in instances, so you could pair this with Total Recall and basically just go to town specking out every single boss. Even the ones that are in instances, like the God Wars dungeon, are traditionally done with Last Recall anyways, so you'll just be able to spec out the mob with the God Sword, recall back to the start of the instance and just go again. And even in instance combat like raids, you'll get the power of the light bearer so you can use even more specs throughout. Not to mention the wilderness giving you the Kopesh. Have fun just going to town on mobs in the multi-combat zone and just specking out over and over again as much as you'd like. This is going to make things like Corp so easy, and I really can't wait to see what people cook up with Total Recall in these regions. For combat masteries, I would of course go 6 points in melee, and then I would probably consider 4 points in ranged. You'll have access to the Drygore blowpipe from the desert, and that will be a great option for you to handle mobs that your melee setup can't take on, such as Kree or the Whisperer. So if you've got that dog in you, try out the Weaponmaster build. Now, last year, we saw the Cult of Din's Bulwark, a super unique build that went all in on defense to get its damage through the Din's Bulwark passive. Well, that's coming back with a bit of a twist. I'm talking Twisted Bow Full Justiciar. That's right, welcome to the Brotherhood of Full Metal Archers. The tier 6 capstone for ranged is absolutely bonkers, giving you a 100% accuracy you no longer miss, meaning you can wear pretty much any tanky gear you'd like, such as Justiciar, and then pair that with a ranged weapon that just won't be affected by the negative ranged accuracy. Fremenic gives you the Dagannoth King's Jewelry, which give you a combined 30 range strength, so your damage is going to be top tier without really needing any kind of range gear like Masori, which gives a pitiful amount of range strength compared to that jewelry. And after all, eating is a DPS loss, so why not just wear tanky gear so you never really have to? In addition, you'll have access to Ascarnia for Void if you really want to increase your damage even more, as well as the Zerite Crossbow, which was probably the most powerful weapon in leagues last year. The progression here is really simple, as you're just going to rush 6 points into ranged, and then you're a powerhouse with just about any weapon you'd like to use. Just to show you how broken this mastery is, let's say you embrace your full shinobi and start tossing rune knives like they're kunai blades. This is the damage of literally nothing but a rune knife against Zuck, and it's nearly twice as much damage as a full build Twisted Bow setup. So again, if you were at all worried about DPS, I guarantee you're going to be just fine. And for your off style, put 4 points into melee so you can still cover the weakness that you have at Grotesque Guardians. Now, if the tank playstyle doesn't suit you, what if we go for a glass cannon playstyle instead with Varlamore, Tyrannwyn, and Fremenic? So really, Crystal Cannon is probably more appropriate here. This build uses the power of the tier 6 ranged mastery to empower the toxic blowpipe. And in addition to that 60% prayer prevention, this is the biggest middle finger to all boss design in the game. Prayers don't matter. Defense doesn't matter. Your blowpipe just does it all for you. And the only real restriction with this build is that you'll be limited by your movement, as you won't be able to move and attack with the blowpipe at the same time. So you're really going to have to think about your playstyle here and try to avoid movement as much as possible, set up like a turret, and just go to town on every single monster. Doesn't matter what they're weak against. And make sure you empower your quiver with the Ava's Assembler ammo saving, because this thing is going to tear through darts so fast, and it might even be an issue having to constantly make more and more and more. But I really feel like this is just going to be such a fun build. It doesn't have any raid regions, but really it doesn't need it. Your blowpipe just kind of does all the work and tears through all this content for you. For people who played Leagues 2, this is like the true redemption of the Toxic Blowpipe before it got nerfed. And while it's not as tanky as the Full Metal Archer build, don't forget that every 5th range hit will heal you for 5 hit points. With a 1-tick Blowpipe, this effectively means that every 1 tick, you're getting 1 hit point. Now increase that by 20% with the passive, and double that with the Sunlit Bracers, you're getting 240 health every minute, or 4 health per second back as long as you're attacking. So who needs to be tanky when you are just channeling a laser beam straight into the mob and just healing back up as long as you're doing damage? Again, for your combat masteries, just dump 6 into range and you're good to go. You can put the points wherever you'd like, maybe 3 in melee, 1 in magic, but I just don't think it really matters. This puts a whole new dimension to Blowpipe Goes Burr. Now, let's talk a bit about magic, which I don't think has been receiving nearly as much attention as the other 2 styles. And that's just because the mage masteries are a little bit weird, and I think they're a little harder to judge compared to the ranged and the melee ones. And while your overall DPS might not be as high as the other 2 styles, your max hits are going to be insane. So I bring you the Executioner, Mortania, Fremenic, and the Desert because you're doing damage. The idea here is that while Mage suffers a bit in the early game, you can instead focus on a range setup early, put 4 points into range, and then transition into 6 Mage down the line. The Desert will give you the Drygore Blowpipe, which should honestly carry you through most content in the game until you get your Shadow. And even if you're not confident in doing the Inferno, you can put 3 points into range instead, and then 6 into Magic, and then fill up the last one later. I think a lot of people are underestimating the power of that Execute effect as long as your max hit is higher than an enemy's hit points. This means that in a lot of content, you'll just be able to one-shot mobs right away, monkeys in the TOA room, even the boulders. And Mortania will also give you the Slayer helmet, which will increase your damage even more against the Echo bosses that are found in this region setup. Fremenic jewelry is insanely good for Magic this year. It's basically the new Kandarin. And you'll easily be able to see like 150 max hits against Zuck, which I think big numbers are pretty damn fun. You can, of course, optimize this even further and go for something like Kandarin instead of the Desert, but that's if you really just want to see the most ridiculous max hits. I think I managed to calculate like a 225 max hit with the Volatile Staff. Sadly, one thing about this build is that I wasn't able to find a way to get enough max hit to one-shot Rangers in the Inferno, because they were like just outside the execute threshold. But for a lot of other mobs, you will actually be able to one-shot them. So a lot of Slayer and even the earlier waves of the Inferno and the Fight Caves, those are actually going to fly by because you're getting a pretty much guaranteed one-shot on them. I know that Magic isn't the most popular right now, but if that's something you're interested in, I think you're going to be totally fine. I think a lot of people just went Magic last year, and that's why they're kind of burnt out of it. Really, as long as you pair Fremenic with any of the raid regions to get a Shadow, I think Mage works, so it's very flexible, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. You're still going to do great damage and not really have too much of a problem. It might just be a little bit slower to get off the ground because you're a little bit more reliant on the Shadow compared to Melee and Range, which can kind of just do whatever they want and still do really good damage. Now, for a bizarre build that I've been working on, why not ditch that Desert and Blowpipe start and instead go ZAF, Zaya, Asgarnia, and Fremenic? Here, you'll actually rush 5 points into Melee, and then try to get access as soon as possible to Echo Hispori to get the Nature's Reprisal. That Flamethrower Salamander will go from 5 tick to 2 tick with the Melee Relic, and now you have like a multi-purpose tool that you can range mobs with while still taking advantage of all of your Melee setup. Combine this with the Fremenic jewelry, which enhances all your styles, and the Void Knight set from Pest Control in Asgarnia, and I think you can see why I'm calling this build the Exterminator. It just handles everything so damn well. Once you've put those 5 points in Melee, you can start putting 5 points in Magic instead, and then doing the Chambers of Xeric to get your Shadow and your Scythe. And along the way, you're not really going to have too much issues because any of those mobs that Melee usually struggles with, you're just going to switch your combat style with the Nature's Reprisal, and it's not even going to feel like a lot of swaps because really you can just switch like your helmet and your weapon style. That's it. It's really an all-purpose build, which is something I really value. I love not having any bosses that just feel like a pain in the ass to go and farm. There's plenty of PVM content to do here as well, so you're not going to be bored. And in the late game, you'll actually have access to the Dog Sword, a very powerful spec weapon, which actually shores up a weakness of Magic that doesn't traditionally have any good spec option. I am so in love with this build right now. I feel like it really doesn't have any weaknesses. And the idea of just walking around with Void and just switching like your helmet and your combat style, I just think it's going to be so much fun. Magic and Melee don't really have the same power level of their capstone masteries as Range does, so you can actually really get away with not going for the 6th one. You don't even really need the prayer penetration because you have so much easy swaps and so much versatility with your build. And I think the idea of going for a 5-5 like true hybrid build is really cool compared to the main style off style that most people are gravitating towards. Now, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, let's say that you are a super casual player, you've got a wife and 17 kids and 3 full-time jobs. What the heck should I build so that I can get my points and, you know, get back to the main game, go back to farming monkfish or something? Well, if you want an AFK approach to the game, play AFK. Asgarnia, Fremenic, and Kandarin. These are 3 pretty easy zones. They don't really have that much difficult content in them, but you'll still get like a really powerful setup between these regions. I would personally look to put 6 points in melee, as you will have access to piety. The Soul Reaper axe from the Duke can be a really easy melee weapon to actually farm for. You'll get the dog sword from Asgarnia if you want to go for a spec build, and then just shore up your weaknesses by putting 4 points into magic instead. Those 4 points in magic combined with the Devil's Element from Thermi should give you enough power to take care of Kriara if you want to as well. And like, okay, you can't kill the Whisper, but like, come on, you're going for an AFK build anyways, right? Do you really want to do that content? Personally, I think that this is just super chill. You can probably replace Asgarnia with Tyrannwyn if you want to do that instead. But if you're just looking to have some fun in leagues, you're not really interested in doing any raids or any really difficult content, I would just go for this setup. I think you're going to be just fine. Sure, you're not going to have the same damage output as some of the more meta options that have mega rares available to them. But like, if you don't really need it, then who cares? And just like all the other builds, if you want to change something, like go for it. Again, there's like a million different combinations I could probably sit here and think of. So really, this is your leagues to have fun and experience the game in a brand new way, the way that you want to. So don't listen to any stupid YouTuber who's telling you what the best builds are. You know, go out there, have fun, go make your own. Who knows, maybe you'll just make some crazy combination that everybody's been missing. And even if you don't, at least you had fun, right? Last year, I had a really interesting question, and that was, what is the worst possible region you could make? And I think that this year, that's way harder to do, but let's try our best anyways. In the comments below, put your absolute worst region, worst combat mastery setup, and if you see somebody else's and you notice something about it that makes it actually redeemable, let them know, because I think that this year you'd have to really intentionally try to like mess up your build. I'm so excited for leagues this year and all of the endless options available. I don't even know what I want to play yet, and I keep bouncing back and forth like every single day. And it's really shined a light on how forced the previous leagues have felt, because this amount of variety and this amount of options is just like, it's unprecedented. So I hope you guys had fun. Let me know if any of these builds change your mind or if you're reconsidering your previous options, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.